Good day. My name is Don Kirkwood. I'm about ready to present a think aloud of how to create a teaching task. There's 4 key ingredients to a successful teaching task. 1, you got to know the content standards that you're going to be teaching. You need to know exactly what the students should learn at the completion of this module. Second, you need an anchor text, something to surround the reading with. Sometimes this might be the textbook, other times this might be a novel. But don't feel like the students have to read the entire anchor text. You just pull the information that's necessary to support the writing of that module. Third is the supporting text. These are usually smaller articles that give opposing views, that may reinforce a certain vocabulary word or something to really deepen the understanding, so when they get into their argument or their explanation, they fully have a sense of exactly what the content is. And then fourth is an authentic writing product in mind. So how do you want the students to communicate this? Well, first, when we look at your content standards, we need to understand exactly what we're teaching. Now, when I look at the standards, I look for the key words. These key words are going to tell me which way to go with the mode of writing I'm going to choose. It also shows me what is the emphasis, especially with vocabulary. What do the students need to research? Well, looking at these standards, I see that they definitely need to understand the basic characteristics. They should be able to summarize a virus, a bacteria, a fungi, and a parasite, and how it relates to the spread, treatment, and prevention of disease. Also, they need to be able to explain the difference between an epidemic and a pandemic, which also relates to the spread of treatment and prevention of disease. Now, there are 9 modes of writing. There's analysis, where you break it down, comparison, where you look in between 2 things. Well, we could probably go comparison on this when we look at the difference between an epidemic and a pandemic. We could do analysis where we break down each of the different types of hazardous microbes. We could evaluate the characteristics and then talk about how that would interact with the spread or the prevention of disease. There's problem solution, cause effect, description. I mean, we could describe everything that was in these standards. We could talk about subsequential, which is usually your lab report. And procedural, same thing, lab report, and the synthesis. Now, what are some types of authentic writing products? Well, according to the Olson article that you probably have already read, and if you look underneath science, well, I was able to see that the main presentations or those writing products are the report, a poster presentation, an argument, a lab report, research proposals, journal articles, and literature review. Now, thinking back to my standards that I'm using, I'm probably going to either lean towards the argument, maybe a journal article. We could look at the text that I'm using, and if it really covers all those key aspects in those in the content standards, then I might even be able to go to a literature review. Now, selecting your possible anchor text. Usually I look towards a novel that really provokes and engages the reader. Some novels I've used in the past is The Survival of the Sickest. Talking about this content standard, they have a whole entire chapter on parasites, which might be a good spot to start, or at least do some type of read aloud with them, because it gives about 4 or 5 case studies of how the parasite has been able to manipulate its host. The hot zone goes deeply into the Ebola and the 4 different strains, even talking a little bit about AIDS. So you're definitely looking at your viruses here, your parasites here. We could look at the flu and different things within epidemics, We can look at plagues within the past. We can look at disease, how it affects, crops. We can look at all the most deadliest plagues that's been out here when we look at the little book of pandemics. But these are usually what I use as a anchor text. I don't have the students read the entire book. I usually pull 3 to 4 chapters that really cover what I need to teach within those content. Definitely read the book before you use the information, just so you know exactly what the students should be pulling out of the book. Now, supporting text. Now, don't think it's just limited to articles. I found there's several podcasts that work really well. Beast Bio breaks down each of the different microbe and talks about how it spreads, so that would be useful information. The BBC Public Health broadcast really has some today newscastings of what's going on with Ebola around the world. So if you're looking at that virus, there's online resources like Daily Science, magazines. I really like how stuff works. They actually had an issue on just viruses, which also had bacteria and some other stuff in it, but it was a really useful tool to use within the classroom. Science Illustrated have also pulled some really good articles on different microbes out of Science Illustrated. These two I've found have been very useful in the classroom. Of course, YouTube. I mean, you can find so many, 5-minute, screencasts on different types of viruses. Discovery Education, if you got one of those accounts, you could do a movie search which supports it. Of course, your local library. Work with your librarian. See what they got when it comes to those content standards. Give them something to read about. Maybe make it this week you need to check out a book on viruses. Then the next week you need to check out a book on bacteria. And just have that, your homework, your take-home reads. TeacherTube is good. I did find this pretty awesome, I guess short film on did scientists stumble upon the cure for Ebola. So it really gives up-to-date information where we are with those looking for a vaccine for Ebola. So it's very useful. And then of course the apps. The really good free app is the BBC News. It has all different types of news articles where you could just go underneath health and it'll give you like within the last week all the articles on different types of diseases, especially Ebola is being huge in the news right now. And then there's this game called Plague Incorporated. On your iPhones is about $1 for the download, but any other mobile device it's free. But it allows the students to become a bacteria, and it allows them to mutate that bacteria and spread from one country to the next country in the hopes of taking out the whole entire world before it's cured. Really goes into the spreading of a disease, especially when your airplanes and your boats and different things like that. Students really love it. You probably could use it for maybe 30 minutes in a class one time, and then they'll take it home and they'll start playing on their own phone. So hey, make it a homework assignment. Be one of those teachers that have your students play games at home. I don't know. I guess that might work. And then of course, the first thing that you got to do when you create this task is, some say it's optional, but in science, I think it really keeps us focused on where we're going. And that's your critical focus question. It pinpoints the important learning that needs to occur in that content. So of course the question is originated from content. Encourage higher order thinking, and I'm going to go a little more detail into that, and allows thinking in an open-ended way. Also defines what students should know and be able to do throughout the unit of study. This is what I love using when I'm creating my questions, because I want to take them really deep into their thinking. So most of the time I use a how might question, which really dives into the meaning and imagination. You could use so many different combinations, but when you have it land in this area, there's really not that many possible responses to the question. And you might end up with, if you have a class of 25 papers that are almost the exact same. But what happens as you move this way, and if you're using how might, you'll probably end up with 25 papers that are totally, completely different. And there is so much more learning when the share out time comes, when students are presenting their work. So here's are some critical focus questions that I created based off the standards that I'm using. How might we prevent lethal pathogens spreading from an epidemic to a pandemic? Could be really intriguing. So they really go into the characteristics of a pathogen, the 4 different types. They look at how it's able to spread and what it really takes for it to become a pandemic, where it's actually moved from one country to another and really starting to spread. Which lethal microbe has the greatest chance of causing a pandemic? This could be a compare and contrast where the students are looking at the different types of microbes and trying to figure out, does a bacteria have a greater chance of spreading than a virus, and they're really looking at the different capabilities of each of these microbes, and they're really going deep into, what does it take to become a pandemic, and even how do we prevent it? Is it going to be easier to spread in a country that has a poor health care versus a country that has a great health care? So there's so many different factors and so many different places that you could take these students in this research. Here's another. How might microbes be used to prevent the spread of infectious disease? This is a whole different approach to these standards. Now they're looking at how mold was created as the first antibiotic, which is a fungi that kills a bacteria, and how we use bacteria to kill fungi, and how we use protists to kill bacteria. I mean, there's just so many different ways, but the research, especially in biotechnology, is really looking at how to use these microbes against each other. Even within our body, we got fungi battling bacteria every single day, and depending on who's winning might lead to the type of disease that we have. Even if we look at the food that we eat, I mean, if you eat a lot of yogurt, your probiotics, you're putting so much good bacteria in your body that a bad bacteria don't even have a chance to survive. So it's really, really intriguing, but a totally different approach to this. And at the same time, how do we prevent a pandemic from occurring? And then the last question I was thinking about is, where could a major epidemic originate that would lead to a pandemic? This would actually change the focus again, where they're going to be looking at the historical events. I'll probably have them research the Spanish flu, I'll research AIDS, research Ebola, research the bubonic plague. I mean, different types of plagues, and look at how they originated and how they spread and how they were eradicated eventually. So critical focus question really leads you in a direction and actually helps you at what type of text you would select later into the process as you start creating that teaching task. Now that we have the critical focus question, let's look at some ways to create a task. Now, if I want to evaluate what's going on, I might use this critical focus question: which lethal microbe has the greatest chance of causing a pandemic? So now I'm looking at research, okay? So after researching, teachers selected informational text, which we talked about earlier, on lethal microbes. Write an argument in which you discuss the spread of infectious disease and evaluate microbial characteristics necessary for a pandemic to occur. Now, the teaching task is filled with the content. Now, remember, one of our major things was that the students would know the characteristics of each of those microbes, the fungi, the virus, the bacteria, the parasite. And they also need to know the difference between a pandemic and epidemic and how it spreads. So this type of research, which gives them some leeway on what they're going to be reading, of course, I would select probably half the text for them to read, would definitely get to authentic learning. So when it comes time for them to be tested, they definitely would know the difference between a virus and a bacteria, or the difference between a pandemic and an epidemic. They would know that the virus needs a host cell to reproduce, that it just replicates the DNA and then busts the cell and then spreads to other cells, whereas a bacteria will exponentially grow and create a colony, and it eats off your flesh. But when you get into your intestines, then it starts being helpful and it's starting to decompose stuff that you're eating. So really goes deep into the evaluation. Here's one where we might go explanation, and I might use this question: how might microbes be used to prevent the spread of infectious disease? Now I gotta make a choice. Am I going to give them the articles? Then it would be reading. If I'm going to have them to do some independent research, then of course it would be researching. But this would definitely take them into an area of really explaining the different types of microbes and how we prevent them from spreading. Here's analysis, and I might use this critical focus question: where could a major epidemic originate that would lead to a pandemic? So they're really analyzing each of these different countries and looking at how do they prevent disease, how do they control it. If someone were to be infected, would they be able to get onto an airplane? Would they be able to get onto a boat? What precautions do these countries have? And then after that research, come to a conclusion which country might be a major risk. We might have 25 different countries after the students are doing this project. And that would conclude. My next screencast will take you through how to actually enter this information into core tools. Thank you very much, and have a great